Hi everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Constant Writers. I'm Dave Musson, I'm your host, and in this podcast I chat to indie horror authors about them, their work, and their relationship, of course, with Stephen King. You check out the other episodes if you haven't listened or watched them already. And hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, click around my channel, see what else you might find when it comes to Stephen King stuff. Now, in this episode of Constant Writers, I'm really excited to bring along to the table one of my favourite human beings in this entire scene, Kelly Brocklehurst, an amazing writer, a fantastic editor, and a genuine, heartfelt, brilliant champion of this incredible scene of talented people. She not only helps make it tick, but she is an integral part of it, and her talents are just very extensive. And I really hope you'll enjoy this chat. You'll find out a little bit more about Kelly, about her writing, about her editing, about how she's teamed up with Jamie Stewart from back in episode 1. And then we pivot to King and we talk about Kelly's book of choice, Christine. Yep, the iconic Christine from 1983. And then we wrap up with the 19-question quickfire King challenge. As with all the other episodes, it's a great chat, so stick around. And if you enjoy this podcast, follow, subscribe, give it a rating, give it a review, and tell a friend about it as well, because it all helps. But enough from me. I'll see you on the other side. But here is the fantastic Kelly Brocklehurst. Kelly, welcome to Constant Writers. How are you doing?
I'm good, Dave. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on, and I feel like we're going to have a lot to talk about, as all of these conversations are ending up being. And obviously we've got the Stephen King stuff, which we'll get to later, but the main purpose of me starting this thing was to get people like you on to hear more about your writing, but with you as well. I mean, we've got the editing, we've got your general just sort of championing and cheerleading of this indie writing scene. I guess it's useful to go back to the start. So tell me a bit about how you got into reading and writing. Like, where did this love of it come from? What was your origin story when it comes to all of this?
So I've always been a reader. Growing up, my parents read to us all the time. I can remember very vividly the first time I read a book on my own. It was the Disney version of The Little Mermaid. And I was at my sister's basketball game, just kind of, by myself in a chair. And I was flipping through it when I realized that I could actually understand the words.
Wow.
And like the only person who was really there for me to tell was my cousin. So of course I did. I was very excited. So that, was the first book I read on my own. And then as I got older, I got into Babysitter's Club. And then young adult fiction wasn't really a genre when I was a teen. So I kind of went from Babysitter's Club to Stephen King.
Right. Okay. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
So you go from Babysitter's Club to Stephen King. Like, where did you start? Where did you start doing the other part and actually creating your own stories? Like, when did that come through? And I guess where did all that come from?
Yeah, I was always writing too. Like when I was in elementary school, I think it was, I kind of had like a family newsletter that I think I maybe did one issue of and never actually gave to anybody. And then in middle school, I was writing really bad poetry. And then in high school, my best friend and I wrote a series of plays together, which we called them plays. It was really basically fan fiction about our own lives. And then in college, I majored in creative writing.
Okay.
So it's, always been there.
And I mean, I was going to ask, like, when you started to take writing more seriously, but I guess majoring in what you majored in, that's a pretty serious decision. But in terms of like your output as a writer that people may have come across through Instagram or whatever, when did you start submitting to anthologies and putting yourself out there and sort of things? And was there anything that prompted you to start doing that?
Yeah. So when I was in college getting my degree, I did have a few poems published in the student-run literary magazine. And then I was writing YA at the time and, sent some manuscripts to a couple of editors and was just not having any luck, or not editors, agents. I kind of really realized around that time that I didn't like the YA world when it came to publishing, so I took a break. And it wasn't until the pandemic hit in 2020 that I started taking things seriously again.
And was that just an urge to create, or is it like leaving it, was that distance what you needed, just a bit of a break from it to reinvigorate things?
Yeah, I think it was both. Prior to 2020, I hadn't really tried to write horror. I didn't think that I could. But then somebody who we won't name started a writers group that I joined. And then, that really got me into gear with writing again and, learning that, I actually can write horror. And there are places where I can submit things and I don't have to go through the big 5 publishers. There are other options here.
So talk to me a bit, and I guess people watching and listening to this, like a bit about your style of writing. Like how would you pitch your style? Because I guess from the stuff I've read of yours, it feels like since you've been doing this stuff since the pandemic, you've got a real confidence about your writing and quite an assured feel to it. Like what's your elevator pitch for your style of writing, I guess?
I think my writing, it tends to lean toward more literary, which is a result of getting the degree in creative writing.
Yeah.
And it's very character driven. I really like to focus on people and their emotions and what sets them off. And
in terms of that, getting those publications and getting those getting that sort of I guess that profile out there for the last couple of years, what sort of things have you what sort of anthologies and stuff have you been featured in, so if people want to go and check out some of your work?
Yeah, so the most recent ones were Slice of Life, and I say that all the time, Slice of Paradise and Beach Bodies, which was DarkLit Press. And then there's More of Us Than You Know, which was published by the now defunct Blood Rights Publishing.
And of course, there's Welcome to the Funhouse, which we'll come on to a little later when we talk a bit more about your editing work. I guess before we jump onto editing, something I've been asking everyone at these is just like, how are you finding the world of indie publishing in general? Like, is it fun? Is it challenging? Is it all of the above? Because I know from my point of view, like when I've had the couple of acceptances, it's been a real validation of what I'm doing, but then like had so many rejections that sometimes it's like, oh great, I've got 4 emails and they're all rejecting stuff. But then the community that has been built, and like the writers group that I think you maybe mentioned earlier, but is one that you've sort of curated one now on Instagram as well. It's a real supportive community. Like for me, there's a real range of emotions in this sort of indie publishing, indie scene. Like how are you finding it now? You've had a couple of years of being quite active and gaining quite a powerful position within it, really.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. I didn't think I was that powerful. No, I think it's what you said. It's a lot of fun. It's stressful at times. I think any avenue of writing is, but the community is, I feel, more supportive of other writing communities than I've seen because we are doing this independently, because we are self-publishing, because we are submitting to smaller publications. And that's not to say there's not drama in the community or like any other writing community. There is, but I think we really rally together when that happens. I don't know. I've just been having a lot of fun with it. The biggest thing in terms of a challenge is marketing.
Yeah.
So I don't have a degree in that. I don't know how to market myself.
I mean, I have a career in communications and marketing, and I still struggle with it. It's just that awkwardness that we all seem to have about like, here's a piece of work I've done and I'm really proud of it and I think people will like it, but what? Sorry, you want me to go and tell people about it and like big myself up? It's a really, I can kind of understand why people like you and Jamie Stewart are so naturally geared towards championing other people. I'm finding it much easier to big up other people than I ever am bigging up myself. But you're right, it's such a, and it's something you don't think about, I guess. Like you put so much effort into writing the stories and then it's like, oh crap, I've got to market this thing as well. Like nobody told me that. I mean, do you feel like you're getting better at it? Do you feel like you're getting more confident in what you're offering? Is it something that's growing with time?
No, I'm really, really bad about it. And I've had conversations with Michael Benavides because he's the same way, where he won't market and talk about his own stuff, but he'll promote other authors all day long. So it's really a matter of stepping out of my comfort zone and really just saying, hey, I did this thing and I'm proud of it, and, read it.
Yeah.
Like, this is out there for the world now. And that's, I'm an introvert anyway, so that's really hard for me to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. Yeah, I feel you totally on that. But people should go and check out your work because it is great. Let's move on to the editing stuff then. I mentioned it earlier. I mean, you are not only a writer, but you're an editor, and then a pretty in-demand one. And I can speak as a very satisfied customer and would happily champion your work when it comes to editing. You do a terrific job, and the stuff you've done for me has been really, really valuable. What made you get into that side of things? Because it's quite it sort of puts you in a fairly intimate position with the writers you're working with, doesn't it? Because you're getting to see things before the finished product, and you're having a say on it. So, like, what sparked your interest in doing the editing?
It was kind of an accident. In that writers group on Instagram mentioned, just a bunch of us were talking one day, and Jamie Stewart and I were both just kind of like, hey, what if there was a carnival anthology? And, we pitched it to Blood Rice, and, they said yes. And so that was what really got me into it. In college, I took an editing class, and there was a short period of time when I thought I might want to become an editor, but I didn't like the type of editing we were learning how to do, which was kind of more technical. So, once I did Welcome to the Funhouse, I realized I really, really enjoy this.
Yeah.
And I was just like, you know what? Let me just jump in. And I reached out to Spencer Hamilton and asked him for some tips on how to get started. And it just took off from there.
And in terms of that sort of one-to-one editing you're doing, like I wanted to mention Welcome to the Funhouse a little bit, because obviously you're editing the works, but you're also a big part in actually curating the collection, selecting the stories and stuff. But on that sort of more, I guess, copy editing, proof editing and stuff, how different is that as a mindset for you when you sit down to read something as an editor compared to if you were either just a fan or even if you were like a beta reader for somebody? Like, are you sort of reading in some sort of hyper awareness state? Do you read things multiple times before you get the red pen out? Like, how does it work?
Honestly, it depends on the project and the timeline that I have for it. There are some that I've just jumped in without having read it beforehand, and I just start making the edits. There are some, like I think I did this with your book, where I read all of the stories first and took notes, and then jumped in and started going through them a second time and editing.
Yeah.
So it, like I said, really depends.
Okay. And do you think the editing work you've done has made you a better writer?
Oh, absolutely. I see things in other people's writing that I wouldn't necessarily recognize in my own. So now when I start to see it in my own, it's easier for me to catch it and be like, oh, I shouldn't do it that way.
And are you finding, to quote one of your own phrases that was cropped up in a lot in the work you did for me, are you finding it easier to flex your own horror muscles now you've done a bit more editing?
I'm trying really hard. I think in some ways, yes. I am still going through edits for the novella that I'm working on. And granted, this was written, back in May or whatever, but my editor is still telling me about my horror muscles.
Okay.
But I think I'm getting there.
Okay. We've mentioned Welcome to the Funhouse a couple of times, and I've already spoken to Jamie for this particular series as well, with whom you've sort of formed this dream team of not only editors but like anthology curators as well. And Welcome to the Funhouse has a very special place in my heart because that was my first publication as well. So thank you for that. You've also teamed up for the Sacrament, which will be dropping at some point in 2023. Like how have you? I mean, you mentioned earlier that you kind of pitched the idea with Jamie and it got picked up and you ran with it. So is that process of not just doing the editing, but actually selecting the lineup, matching it to the theme and all of that stuff, and I guess working with Jamie as well, is that something you've enjoyed doing?
Oh, yeah. I love it. I mean, Jamie and I got pretty close when we met during the King quizzes. And working in with him, it's so easy. We have discovered that, we're on the same page. 99% of the time in terms of what stories we like, which ones we want, even like the order to put them in the book. It just, it's been wonderful. I couldn't ask for a better co-editor.
And I mentioned earlier, the two of you are both massive champions of the scene and like the people in it. And I can totally see why teaming up and working on an anthology would be a real excitement for you and would really sort of satisfy that side of what you do. But I guess on the flip side, when you have to send those rejections out, given that you're both such big fans of what the scene has to offer, that must be even harder than I imagine it would normally be anyway.
It's so hard. I mean, it's hard enough when I don't actually know the person that we're sending the rejection letters to. It's even harder when it's somebody that I'm friends with.
Yeah.
And then I have that added layer of having an anxiety disorder. Probably just, makes it that much harder. But, we're always willing to talk to people. Like, we had one person that we sent a rejection letter for the Sacrament, and I knew that person wanted feedback. And so I was more than happy to give that.
And I guess again, that's all going to help in terms of your own writing as well, and your own, your just your own skill set. And I mean, for a peek behind the curtain, obviously I featured in your first anthology. I didn't make the cut for Sacrament, and like the feedback I got was really helpful. That was really encouraging. It wasn't like a sort of, no, you suck, how dare you, get out there. It was, it was still, there was still heart to it. And, I think it's, I can only imagine how tough it is. But, you guys proved on Welcome to the Funhouse that you make the right calls and you can structure it. It works for the anthology. So I'm just really excited to see what you did come up with for the Sacrament when that drops. I think it's really, it's definitely on my list of ones to keep an eye on. In terms of future projects, then, so you've got the Sacrament coming out. What else do you have in the pipeline for? Well, this will be dropping at some point early 2023. So what's on the horizon for 2023 from you?
Mostly editing at this point, depending on what happens with the Price Manor novella. We've been talking about that having a December release date, but there's also been talk about relaunching the series in January. So that's a little bit up in the air. For editing, Kit Romero, or Kit Robertson, Christopher Robertson, he is doing a charity anthology, but he's come up with a name for it yet, but I'll be editing that for him.
Cool.
I should be editing another novella that he's working on, editing something for Michael Benavides. So that's pretty much where I'm at for 2020.
Great. Yeah, that's good. That's busy, and it's some cool people to be working with as well.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, as I mentioned at the start of this, and as people know, this channel is a Stephen King channel, so we might as well talk about him for a bit while we're here and chatting. I guess before we get into your pick of which book you've gone for and that, just curious, I mean, you said earlier you went from Babysitter's Club to Stephen King. So, like, what does Stephen King mean to you? Like, what sort of place does he hold in your heart?
I don't even know how to describe it, honestly. I remember seeing Carrie in my aunt's library when I was a kid, and my mom wouldn't let me watch the movie, but she let me read the book. So that's, kind of what really sucked me in. And then I had a different aunt who was also a huge Stephen King fan. So, one of us would buy the book and read it and then, give it to the other. And just having that bond with her really now means a lot to me because she passed away a few years ago. And so it was just something that we kind of shared in a really good way. And so, I think that's kind of one of the big things for me with him. And then plus just in the last few years, all of the wonderful people I've met on Instagram because of Stephen King books.
Yeah, I often wonder whether he realizes like quite what an impact he's having in terms of like just people who were previously strangers, like making friends all through a love of his work. I'm sure he does because he's pretty aware of his own status. But yeah, I get the sense he'd probably quite like that now. And what about his impact on your own writing? Has he had much of an impact, or is it is he someone that you've read so much of that you almost push against when you're doing your own writing?
No, he's definitely had an impact. To go back to my middle school days, my seventh grade literature class, every now and then we would have assignments of, write a story about whatever. And I still have it in storage somewhere. But whatever story I wrote, my tagline for it was "They've seen Children of the Corn." So it was probably just a riff off of Children of the Corn. I do kind of credit for him for really getting me into horror novels. And the few times that I tried to write horror, before 2020, I don't think I would have done had I not been a fan.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. For the purposes of this this series, I've asked all of the people who joined me to pick one King book in particular to talk in a bit more depth about. I knew exactly which one you were going to pick before I even sent you the email. I knew it was going to be Christine, and I think anyone who's seen your Instagram will also have guessed that it would be Christine. Before we get to that car that you love so much, were there any sort of, I was going to say, were there any sort of, I guess, that challenged Christine or came close, which there probably weren't, but do you have any honourable mentions that you would also throw in here?
It's actually funny that you say all that because I almost did not pick Christine.
Really?
Because I knew everybody would expect it and be like, how much more can I say about it? But for honorable mentions, I mean, I still can't stop thinking about The Stand. It's even in my top 5, but I can't stop thinking about it. Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's pretty iconic. I mean, I know I've sort of, people will know I'm not the biggest fan of The Stand, but I can totally understand why it gets in people's heads for sure. And there's even a sort of an appearance of Christine in it, isn't there, in the revised one? So let's use that as a segue then. Christine, I mean, you said you're almost a bit worried that you don't know how much more you can say. I'm struggling as to how to introduce it, so I'll just go with facts. It's the iconic tale of course, the red and white 57 Plymouth Fury. It's King's first book of 1983. I mean, productive year. He put 3 out that year. And I think, I mean, I'd put in the notes, it's arguably one of his most enduring creations. I think I can take out arguably that it is one of his most enduring creations and completely iconic. All that being said, without wanting to put words in your mouth, like, what is it about this book that you love so much?
Yeah, I feel like Christine is a really divisive book. You either love it or you hate it. And I feel like the people who hate it do so because they're so focused on the car, when it's really a book about the relationship between Arnie and Dennis. It's about moving from childhood to adulthood, and you lose friends when that happens sometimes. And the reason it resonates with me so much is because when I was a senior in high school, my best friend and I had a falling out, and we didn't talk for 7 years.
Wow.
And we talk again now, but we've never once brought up our falling out. And, when I read Christine now, I kind of see a lot of that situation in what happens between Dennis and Arnie.
And when you first read Christine, was that pre you and your friend falling out? Like, was that part of your experience of doing it for the first time?
I read Christine a few years before my friend and I had our falling out. And I think it was actually one of the few King books that scared me the first time I read it. I've just always loved it.
So, I mean, let's talk like favorite scenes, favorite characters, all of that kind of stuff. You I agree with you completely. Like, people do get so focused on the car, but it's a love story. It's a story about friendship. It's a story about obsession, and it's a story about the humans involved. Like, who are your standouts when it comes to the cast of characters within Christine?
Yeah. I mean, Will Darnell, of course. Ian's just such a bully. And I think that's, for me, one of the big things about the King books, which a lot of us talk about, is how it's the people who are the real monsters. And, Darnell is one of them. Buddy is one of them. And, those are the characters I think who really stand out because they're so much more terrifying than the car.
I always see it as a bit of a popcorn book. It's it's a real page turner. It's obviously got a lot of action going on. Like, in terms of scenes that that have stuck with you? Are there any that you particularly enjoy? Like any of the bad guys getting their comeuppance that you particularly get a kick out of?
Buddy, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I find that scene so terrifying when Christine goes after him. And then is it Darnell who's in his house and like running up the stairs when Christine comes after him? Okay. That one too. Like, those two scenes always got me.
The one that really got me was less of one of I think the kill scenes are all amazing, but the scene that always stuck with me is when, is it New Year's Eve, when Dennis and Arnie go out for a drive together and Arnie's just drinking and Dennis sees all the ghosts in the car and stuff. It's just, there's something for a book that's almost bordering on the edge of being a bit silly at times. That drive was really dark and really disturbing.
Yes.
I think it was really just really captured like how far gone Arnie was, and seeing, as you mentioned earlier, seeing Dennis realizing that he'd probably lost his friend at that point. And it's kind of heartbreaking and scary at the same time. I think really, really powerful writing in many ways. I guess something else that is a real thread throughout the book is the music. Like, is that, have you ever sort of made a Christine playlist? Have you ever gone through and sort of checked out all the songs while you're reading it, or done any of that sort of stuff?
I mean, I can't remember a lot of the songs off the top of my head, but it's rock and roll, so it's a lot of music that I grew up with.
Okay.
So I do on occasion go listen to them. I have the movie soundtrack on vinyl, so I listen to that. Like, I love the music in Christine. So good.
And like, in terms of the car itself, obviously the red and white Fury, like red, quite an angry color, quite a horror leaning color. Like, do you think Christine would have been as scary if she'd have been, I don't know, blue and yellow, green and purple? Like, how important is the color of that car?
But you know what? I just never thought about that. But
I hadn't until literally just then when it came out of my head.
Well, yeah, now that you say that, I'm wondering if it would have been effective if she were in a different color. And I don't know that it would have been. The only other color that maybe could have been effective is if she were a black car, because then it's just harder to see at night.
No, it's one to ponder, isn't it? Because it's part of the plot, if I remember correctly, it's part of the plot that the red is such a rare color as well. That's why they're able to pin it down to Arnie quite quickly, isn't it?
Right. Like, I think LeBay had her custom painted.
Yeah. No, interesting. I'm just finding my own questions interesting. That's very vain of me. But yeah, I'd never thought of it as well. It's an odd one. In terms of the book, because the book and the movie came out in the same year, and often they get conflated and sort of they can often get merged. In terms of the book specifically, is there anything in the book that perhaps didn't make the cut of the movie that is a powerful moment for you that I don't know, perhaps you thought should have made the movie, or is one that you enjoy being in the book but maybe wouldn't have worked in the movie? Or
faithful to the book. But what I think the movie lacks, and I love the movie, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have the same emotional depth. And not to say that Carpenter didn't necessarily try, but I think it was harder to translate that kind of depth in a movie because we don't have as much room.
So you said you're a fan of the movie. Like, what is it about? I mean, it's the movie's almost as iconic as the book in many ways. I think particularly with when you pair it with the soundtrack and the artwork and stuff. Like, what is it about the movie that you enjoy?
I just think it's so much fun. I know the quality of it is not on the same level as the book, but I mean, it's John Carpenter, and I just get so much enjoyment out of that movie. I just have a blast every time I watch it.
And the soundtrack as well adds an awful lot to it. Yeah, it's it is fantastic. Christine is one that there's always chatter, there's always rumors of a remake. Do you want a remake? Like, and if so, like how different would you want it to be from what Carpenter did?
Yeah, no, I don't want a remake.
Fair enough.
Partly because I think, the original is Carpenter. Let's not touch that. But partly because all the remakes we've been getting since It Chapter 1, a lot of them haven't been very good. So I don't know that I trust anybody to do a good job with this. Maybe Flanagan. Now, that's not to say I won't watch a remake if it happens, but I don't know if I'll like it.
Yeah, Flanagan's an interesting choice because he's got that heart about him, hasn't he? So he could probably maybe get more of that depth that perhaps Carpenter didn't get. But I'm with you. I mean, you wouldn't get the practical effects now. That would all be CGI'd, and it's never going to look as good as what Carpenter did. The soundtrack obviously would never compare. And I mean, there's so much other stuff that should be getting made as well, that we don't need more remakes, particularly with the last few years, as you've been saying, like some of those duds.
Yeah, and how they've been changing some of the spot lines for them, like Pet Cemetery, which I get why they has to do it. Or did you see the new Firestarter?
Oh yeah.
The changes they made of that, like what changes will they make to Christine? Because that could go really badly.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, and the bullies won't be sort of throwbacks to 50s greasers either. It'll probably be, I don't know, it'll probably be set now, and I don't know, they'll be like looking like they're from the 80s or the 90s or something. Yeah, I'm with you. Let's not have a remake. Let's leave it with Carpenter. Okay, so last question on Christine then. Going back to the book, if there's somebody out there watching this, listening to this, who has never given Christine a go, like if I asked you for a 3-word summary to convince that person to go and pick Christina, what would those 3 words be?
I have no idea. I'm really bad at stuff like this. I wrote that question down and then never wrote an answer for it. But I think it goes back to that, childhood to adulthood.
Yeah.
Which I mean is maybe not like the most enticing description, but
hey, I think it works. I think that's fine. It's your choice. I like it. Good. Okay. Right. We are almost done with this, Kelly. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed chatting to you. I guess before I let you go though, and this isn't one of those things you sometimes see on podcasts and stuff where it's like hey, we're going to do this fun thing. Are you up for it at the end? We're doing the 19 question quickfire King challenge. That's not an option. It's happening before we wrap this up. So I'm just flagging this here basically to just check that you're ready for it, because like I say, we're jumping into it. So
yeah, let's do it.
You good to go? Cool. So this is the same quickfire round that we're rounding off all of these chats with. And as I said to you before we push record, like this can be as quickfire as you like. So if you want to give any explanations, you can, and you might say something that makes me ask for an explanation, but like you don't need to. You can just answer the question and we can move on. So it's as quickfire as you want it to be. But let's jump into it. So what was the first King book you ever read?
Harry. And
what's the most recent one you've read?
Well, as of today, I'm still reading with Tommyknockers. By the time this comes out, it'll probably be The Dark Half.
Okay, cool. I have a feeling I know the answer to this one, but I will ask anyway. What is your all-time favourite Stephen King book?
Christine.
And what about your all-time least favourite?
Probably The Talisman.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. What do you think is King's most underrated book?
Everything's Eventual.
Oh, a nice choice. Nice. In terms of cover artwork, which King book has your favourite cover?
There's an edition of It, and I have no idea which one it is, but I think it's like where you kind of book by the house.
That's a UK one.
Look it up. Is it the UK one? I love that one.
The one where the house is kind of like the clown face.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think that is UK hardback first edition, I think. Yeah, I know the one you mean. Yeah, it's got a bit of a carnival feel to it, hasn't it? Which I guess makes sense. Okay, and what about your least favourite cover art?
Honestly, all of the Rainbow Hotter editions. I don't actually like those very much. I think they're kind of boring.
Do you mean the new ones or the ones that I've collected, or both?
No, all the ones that you have that people all over Instagram have. Just the spines are gorgeous, but I think the covers are so boring.
It's a good job we're near the end of this interview. No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm only hurt slightly, but it's fine. What is the one King book that you could recommend to anyone?
Pet Cemetery.
Okay.
I think that's one that has something for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. In terms of adaptations, what's your favorite adaptation of a King book?
Probably Misery.
Okay. And what about your least favorite?
The Dark Tower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we all pretend doesn't exist.
Yeah. I think if enough of us pretend it doesn't exist, then somebody will fund a proper series of it, and can just push that one out of existence. But okay. In terms of thinking about your own writing, if you could have any King character make a cameo in your work, who would you like to have?
For my answer, I wrote down Blaine.
Okay.
Because I absolutely love him. If I were to go with something easier, Christine would be the easiest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So definitely a vehicle either way, though. That's interesting. I like it. Which King book or story would you say is most similar to your own style of writing?
I have no idea. That's a really hard question. And I had actually asked another one of my writers groups what they thought, and their answer was anything that appears that is character driven and supernatural. Okay. So take your pick, I guess.
Yeah. There's a few there. Okay. No, I like that. And for this next question, I'm just going to give 3 categories, and I just want you to pick one King book for each. So I want a King book that you would keep forever and reread until it falls apart. A King book that you would read only once, put back on the shelf and just forget about. And a King book that you would gladly delete from existence.
Yeah, so keep the whole Dark Tower series. Read only once the Talisman.
Mm-hmm.
And delete forever, I think, Roseworth.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, I can see that. Cool. So for the final 5 of this quick fire round, it's a simple either or round. And I was going to explain it more, but I don't need to explain it more because it is a simple either or. I'm making it far less simple than it is. So I'm just going to jump into the questions. 5 more to go. The book or the movie?
The book.
Okay. The Stand or It?
Despite what I said earlier, It.
Okay. Would you rather take a holiday in Derry or have a night at the Overlook?
Probably a night at the
Oh,
Overlook.
brave. Okay. Short story or full novel?
Full novel.
And lastly, would you rather go for walkies with Cujo or have a weekend away with Annie Wilkes?
A weekend with Annie.
Wow.
I think I could actually survive her. Cujo would just kill me.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I suppose if a rabid Cujo, yeah.
Yeah, it's just tiny Cujo. If it's not rabid Cujo, then obviously walkies with Cujo.
Yeah, I feel like Cujo was such a good boy. I think even rabid Cujo, there's a way of reaching him somewhere, potentially. Whereas Annie Wilkes, I don't know. But hey, you're going on the weekend with her, so it's not my problem. Kelly, thank you so much. I really enjoyed chatting. Before we do wrap this up, just a chance for you to plug where people can find you, where your work is, like all of those kind of things. So the floor is yours. Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, the main place is Instagram, where I'm at Kelly Brocklehurst. I'm also on Twitter at Kel Brocklehurst, and that's Kel with 1 L. I'm not as active on there, and we'll see how long I stay on when Elon Musk owns it.
I mean, we'll see if Twitter still even exists by the time this episode drops as well.
Seriously. But those are the 2 main places.
Okay, great. And I'll pop links to those in the description for this. And yeah, just looking forward to seeing how the Sacrament comes out, the Price Manor stuff when that eventually all happens, and more of your editing work again. So Kelly, great to chat to you. Thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing, because you're one of the real stars of the scene and one of the people who make it a really great place and great community to be part of. So I know we discussed earlier it's difficult for us to champion what we do, so I'm going to champion you right now. You're a real gem in this scene, so thank you. Just keep doing what you do. It's really, really appreciated.
Thank you, Dave. And thanks for having me on. This has been so fun.
So there we go. Huge thanks to Kelly for joining me on Constant Writers, and I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Do go and check out her work. In the description, you'll find links to all of the various collections that you can find Kelly's work in, as well as her Instagram and her Twitter feeds, as she mentioned in the conversation. Also in the description, you'll find links to sign up to my newsletter, where you get a collection of some of my short fiction for free just for signing up, and links to buy your copy of the Stephen King quiz book, which I published at the end of last year, that I'm very, very proud of. And given that Kelly and I were saying how difficult it is to market ourselves, I'm going to do it right here. My book's really good. Go and buy it. Kelly's stuff is really good. Go and buy that as well. And you'll find all the descriptions you need below. That's about it for this episode. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Do rate, review, follow, subscribe, tell a friend, all of that stuff. But most importantly, come back again, because I've got another conversation with another constant writer for you very, very soon.